Joining me today to debate all things red, blue, and maroon is Mike Dewar, Vice President of UChicago Political Union, and Stephen Yaffe, Vice President of College Republicans. I'm your host, Liz Stark, and this is Phoenix Politics. Thank you both for joining us today.
My pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Great. So to start things off, Stephen, who is the top contender for 2016?
That's a good question. The great thing about the Republican primaries is there's a lot of good options. And I don't think there's a top option right now. There's a top tier. I think you can look at Jeb Bush, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Chris Christie, and Scott Walker. Those are the top contenders right now. There are going to be a lot of others, but I think all those people have a plausible shot at the nomination.
Mike, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I think it's interesting that Stephen included Ted Cruz in the top tier. I wouldn't do that. I think the 2016 Republican nomination looks very, very interesting. And frankly, I would agree with his slate with the exception of Cruz. The Democratic side is, well, Secretary Clinton's the front runner, of course. If you look at the polling data, you look at name recognition, if you look at who she's hired, you look at the amount of money, she's the front runner. But I think people overemphasize her inevitability. I think there's definitely going to be a very interesting 2016 on the Democratic side. We've got 9 months until Iowa. She's the only person so far to formally declare. And then two other people now with Lincoln Chafee have an exploratory committee. So we're really just getting going, and so I think it's far too early to say anything definitive about who's going to be the Democratic nominee.
Right. So right now, Hillary Clinton, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, and Marco Rubio have all declared that they will be running for president.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what is the key to political longevity over the next couple months?
It's a good
well,
question.
gosh.
Given that, we wouldn't have to do this talk show.
So
yeah.
What can they do to stay relevant to voters? How can they appeal to them over?
They have to be on the ground in the early swing states, in New Hampshire and in Iowa, meeting with voters.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be able to get an enough of a percentage, because there's going to be a lot of people on the Republican side, for instance. And it's going to be whoever gets 25%, it's going to be the person who's going to be the nominee in all these states. It's going to be a numbers game.
Yeah, I think the Republican side is definitely heated up already, and so they're busy, doing every single thing that they can. I think actually the best strategy for the Clinton campaign is what they're doing right now, which is very, very low key.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, not de-emphasizing their relevance to voters, if anything. If you looked at Secretary Clinton's recent trip to Iowa, what she was doing was, meeting with small hand-picked, voter meetings and, listening sessions.
Chipotle.
Yes, ordering from Chipotle and being caught on security camera and becoming a meme. Yeah, all of those things like that. She's essentially running for free now, but Secretary Clinton can't make too much of that. She sort of has to step back, be low-key, reasonable, and not look like she's just trying to completely end any sort of Democratic choice in the nomination process.
Which is what she's trying to do.
Which is what she's trying to do, yeah.
So Iowa is coming up very shortly. What can we expect?
I mean, shortly is an interesting term. We're so far looking at a human gestation period until Iowa. There are 9 months between now and the Iowa caucuses for the Democratic Party. So I think a lot of things can happen. And I think we're really waiting for the Democratic campaign season to start. I think what you're going to be seeing in Iowa is, if you look at Governor Martin O'Malley's hires, who I think is probably the most likely competitor to Clinton so far, almost all of his people are Iowa specialists. Besides, I think, Adam Goers and Bill Hires, who are both national figures, you've got a lot of people who are, Braley for Congress, Braley for Senate, Harkin for Senate, things like that. Actually, Adam Goers is, in fact, an Iowa specialist in a little bit, in certain respects. So that's going to be the battleground, right? Iowa, it always has a smaller voting pool, always has a more grassroots-oriented campaign. So if a challenger with limited funds, limited campaign staff, et cetera, because Secretary Clinton has essentially sucked up all the oxygen available in the Democratic sphere, it's going to happen there.
Right.
And your thoughts on
Well,
Iowa?
so Secretary Clinton knows that that's where she's going to have to do well in the Iowa primary. She knows it's where she basically lost the race in 2008. The fact of the matter is she knows that there are going to be other people running. Martin O'Malley is probably going to run. It's possible that other Democrats are going to run. She knows that she's going to have to do well in Iowa, and I think they're going to have a good ground game in Iowa. I don't think that another candidate is really going to be able to outdo the Clinton campaign in Iowa. The fact of the matter is they're getting the top talent, they have the money, they're able to put people on the ground. Money is really important in politics. Like the ability to have to run ads, the ability to have people on the ground. These are things that money buys. I don't see Martin O'Malley getting a significant amount of money behind him. And if you look at the polls now, he's polling 1%. Clinton's polling 62%. In the end, Martin O'Malley might want to run, and he might be a good fit for the Democratic Party, but the Clinton machine has the party locked down. And I think that it's pretty inevitable, unless Elizabeth Warren runs, that Secretary Clinton's going to be the Democratic nominee.
I, of course, would disagree. I think Governor O'Malley will get a certain amount of funding. I think once Warren has declared, for the nth time that she's not going to run, and once Governor O'Malley declares, and perhaps Warren endorses O'Malley, perhaps she doesn't. I don't honestly know what the best path for her is in sort of walking the line in 2016. But once people realize that O'Malley is going to be the progressive challenger to Clinton, people are going to get behind him. Similarly, the fundraising advantage that Secretary Clinton has may be significant, but while field is expensive, it isn't the most expensive thing in politics. And so if you do have a good grassroots upswell, which I think O'Malley can seize as the progressive challenger, you can make a capable case in Iowa, especially because, the grassroots of the Democratic Party is the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Progressive activists go out and knock doors. Progressive activists, talk to their neighbors, things like that. These are the people who are invested in the party. And so the base can rise. It's just a question of will it.
But what I think is important is that I think you can make a plausible case that Elizabeth Warren is qualified to be president. President of Harvard, I believe. She's like very, very well regarded. I don't think that Martin O'Malley, most people would imagine Martin O'Malley as a president. He didn't have a very good term as governor. His lieutenant governor ran to replace him in 2014 and lost in a startling upset by 5 points to a Republican in Maryland, the Blues Duval states. People don't regard Martin O'Malley.
Again, I would disagree with that, though.
Right. But there are other potential contenders in the Democratic Party. You have Jim Webb. You have Lincoln Chafee, who you mentioned earlier. So what would it take to take down the Clinton machine? What's her Achilles heel?
First of all, I would like to contest Governor O'Malley's governorship. If you look at the numbers, he significantly outperformed his region. The Mid-Atlantic right now in our post-industrial, globalized economy is significantly challenged because, it was built on the promise of good American union jobs. Sure. And, recent policies have said...
He outperformed his region by his chosen candidate losing by 5 points in Maryland.
I'm not talking about elections here. We're talking
about Maryland here. We're not talking about...
I'm talking about governing ability. Now look, 2014 was a bad year for all Democrats.
He
didn't. Yeah, but in terms of educational stats, in terms of job growth, in terms of economic performance, Maryland did better than its neighbors in a region that has been really hit by the policies of the Democratic and Republican parties of the past 20 years.
So to bring this back to the presidential election in 2016, so each candidate has these pros and cons, and something that I want to talk about a little more is how things are going to shape up on the Republican side. Yeah. Are there too many cooks in the kitchen, or do we need this kind of variety from the Republicans?
I think we need this variety. I think it's really important, especially because Jeb Bush is running. It's really important that Republicans have the option of not having another Bush, or of having the choice to have another Bush. And I think a lot of this is going to come down to Governor Bush is going to be the establishment candidate. He's going to get the majority of the money, and he's going to have the best well-run campaign. He's going to have the most money, most ground. Maybe not the most ground game, but he's going to have a very good campaign with the top strategists. So the question is going to be: is there a legitimate alternative to Governor Bush? And can Jeb convince people that the country is ready for another Bush? And should we have another Bush-Clinton race? Because the Clinton aspect is going to be really important. And if we do, nominate Jeb Bush, do we take away one of our biggest attacks against Hillary Clinton? That she's just continuing this political dynasty, and that America's not about dynasties. So I think it's good that we're going to have a healthy primary. Also, there's a lot of different ideas on the Republican side. You got Rand Paul, who's a little more libertarian, who has different views on foreign policy. You have Marco Rubio, who's pro-immigration reform. You have Ted Cruz, who's very much a Tea Party person. So there's a lot of diversity on the Republican side, and it's going to be good to show the country that Republicans aren't just like a monolithic group, that we have a lot of different voices.
Yeah, and in fact, I would make it an even more even game than you would suggest. If you look at the fundraising battle, it looks like right now Marco Rubio is the front runner in what Pauls are calling the quote Sheldon Adelson primary. Of course, Sheldon Adelson, casino oligarch, likes to donate lots and lots of money to Republican primaries based on their support for Israel. And it looks like via remarks that the press Kremlinologized to mean that he supports Rubio more, he's going to be getting a lot of money from Sheldon Adelson. And of course, Sheldon Adelson was the person who revived Newt Gingrich's campaign in 2012 for 2 more states, single-handedly. Other candidates are looking like they're going to be raising a lot of money. So Governor Bush right now is sort of on the defensive in the fundraising game. So I think it really is an even primary, especially when you look at the sheer amount of talent on the Republican side. I mean, like them or not, Rand Paul, Governor Bush, Marco Rubio are all very smart politicians, and Scott Walker. They're all very, very smart politicians, and they know how to get press, get results, all sorts of things like that. They're just very savvy operators. And so, I mean, just as someone who likes politics, it's going to be very, very, very interesting to watch the Republican primary process.
And you were talking about savvy strategy for the upcoming election. We saw that Hillary Clinton announced her candidacy via a YouTube video, and Ted Cruz announced it over Twitter. So how is social media changing the game, and how do you expect it to?
It's rapidly changing the game. Well, I don't think Hillary Clinton's announcement was the best of the announcements. For example, her logo was universally criticized as being absolutely ridiculous.
What are your thoughts on the logo?
Yeah, the logo's pretty bad. It's a rightward arrow. It's really a symbol for Republicanism.
I actually ended up making something that looked very similar in paint over the summer for the Democratic left of the political union. And ultimately it was rejected.
But what I think is really important is apps like Meerkat and live stream apps. That's going to fundamentally change how politicians operate. So a big thing that's happened in the last 10 years has been the proliferation of trackers. So trackers are people who are hired by political campaigns, other kind of groups like PACs that follow around candidates, go to their events, try and sneak in, or go to public events and videotape basically everything that a candidate is doing. And there's been efforts to try and stop trackers, hold your events in private where you can kick them out. But with the advent of apps like Meerkat and Livestream, these are apps where people can, for instance, just take their iPhone and videotape like Secretary Clinton speaking and post it online for everyone to see in real time. It means that everything that candidates say are going to be even more heavily scrutinized than was in the past. And before, this didn't happen during primaries. It happened during presidential campaigns because the media was always with the candidates. But the media is not always with the candidates during primaries. When they're meeting with voters, when they're doing what's supposed to be off-the-record things. I think it's going to be really important because it's going to have the potential for some candidates to make mistakes and have those mistakes amplified. So I think. Yeah,
I think that the advent of social media like Twitter and things like that, it's very good for the media cycle. Yeah. I mean, the media cycle already operates on Twitter. Not only is it 24 hours now, but it's every minute of those 24 hours, which frankly makes media a very unappealing proposition. But ultimately, that doesn't affect the story too much. What really affects the elections with social media is how it plays into field, because field makes campaigns, field makes victories, field is everything, field is wonderful. And so, when you look at how you're able to target someone through their Facebook preferences and then get someone who knows them to make a volunteer pitch for them, when you look at things like being able to track people's preferences and target ads at them, that I think is the really powerful aspect of social media in campaigns.
A great example is the Rand Paul campaign has been basically following where Hillary's been going in Iowa and then running targeted Facebook ads towards those people in those towns. So Hillary Clinton goes there and then they see anti-Hillary ads on their Facebook.
And those ads cost a lot of money, right?
They don't cost.
On the internet it's less.
On the internet it's free to distribute. There's probably the cost of Facebook and the cost of producing it, but it's very small.
Yeah. In terms of getting the message out there and promoting one's candidate, this is supposed to be one of the most expensive elections
Yeah.
in the entire history of the presidential races.
Yeah.
So how do we reconcile that? How do we deal with all of the money that's just flowing into this race?
I mean, it's very bad for democracy because the press pays attention to how much money you raise, candidates pay attention to how much money you raise. On the other hand, I think there are tools that are emerging, well, bad for privacy of individual citizens, so like the social media thing, are probably better for campaigns that don't have as much money. Like field is expensive. You have to buy your database from the party. You have to, ultimately when it comes close to the election, you buy paid door knockers. You have to buy direct mail. But it's less expensive than TV ads. TV ads are the vast majority of the expenditure of campaigns. And the interesting thing is, they're the least effective campaign tool. And so, while money matters, and while the fact that politicians are extremely worried about money is very, very bad for our democracy, ultimately it punches below its weight in terms of actual electoral outcomes.
I'm not sure if TV ads are as ineffective as you say. Look, for instance, to the 2014 primary in Iowa, where Joni Ernst ran her ad with the castrating hogs, and that single-handedly won her the primary. So I think ads are really important. What's important for the ad makers and for the campaigns is having ads that cut through the clutter. And ads also are really important because they shape what the discourse is in the campaign. So for instance, in Governor Rauner's campaign in 2014, the campaign changed the narrative of the race by starting to run ads on criticizing Governor Quinn's crime policies, so like prisons, etc. And you can change if you run ads. I think you can change the dynamic somehow. But it also, if your ads don't cut through the clutter, if you're just running generic ads that aren't effective on TV, it's not going to change anything. But if the ads infect the media cycle and the media starts commenting on the ads, and then people start talking about them on Facebook and sharing the ads, that's how they have meaningful impact.
That's when things go viral.
Right. So that's when things go viral. That's the goal. Is to have a viral ad.
So money is important, advertising is important, but so are the ideas. So what will be the most controversial or most important issues that these candidates will face?
I mean, on the side of the left, the Democratic Party, I think you're already seeing the issues of the campaign starting to shape up. The Clinton family, regardless of who's in office, they share a common philosophy. Secretary Clinton and President Clinton share a common political philosophy, which is a centrist embracer of sort of liberal internationalist policies with a hawkish tinge, taking out rogue states, things like that. That's why Secretary Clinton voted for the Iraq War. And similarly, global trade. Encouraging free trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership and its partner in Europe, things like that. You look at that, President Clinton signed NAFTA. It looks like, from what we saw in what's been released from the Obama administration, Secretary Clinton was one of the people really pushing for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And already that's shaping up as an issue. Senator Warren has come out strongly against it as a corporate power grab held in secret. Many of the parts of the TPP are not actually allowed to be divulged until 4 years after they come in force. And Governor OMalley has already come out against the TPP. Secretary Clinton is attempting to run away from that. She sort of threaded the needle when asked about it. And so that's sort of indicative of what the larger debate is going to be. Because Secretary Clinton is a centrist. You can't really run away from that. But right now, the Democratic Party is not centrist. The base is not centrist. The people who are going to show up to the primary are not centrist. And so it's going to be challenging for Secretary Clinton to run away from her record on a variety of issues. Taxation, TPP, NAFTA, things like that. And then, also, Secretary Clinton has shown a propensity to scandal. As we have seen, the emails, whatever this book is going to say. She's been in politics for a very long time, and when you're in politics for a very long time, you have skeletons in your closet. And so I think the big challenge for her is avoiding those. We don't know how big they're going to be. We don't know what they're going to be, but they are going to be there.
Now, on the Republican side, what are the issues that they will have to
So I
face?
think the biggest issue in the race is probably going to be the economy, but it's not going to be the biggest issue in the race in the primary. Most Republicans agree on basically what to do about the economy. They have differing views with Secretary Clinton and most progressives, but I think what's going to really divide the Republican field is going to be foreign policy and immigration and education, but education in the context of Jeb Bush and Common Core. But I think foreign policy is going to be a really big deal, especially with Rand Paul in the race. He has a different view on foreign policy than the other candidates have, more libertarian view, a more restrained view. And a lot of people are going to start calling him out on it. A super PAC is running, or they might be a PAC. A PAC is running already attack ads in Iowa against Rand Paul on his support of President Obama's negotiations with Iran about their nuclear weapons program, or about their nuclear program. So that's going to be important. Immigration is going to be important because Marco Rubio was one of the main senators developing the status immigration plan that ultimately failed. Jeb Bush, it's pro-immigration reform. That's going to be big. But amongst most of the issues amongst the conservatives, other than that, we pretty much agree. So it's going to be about style also. It's going to be about experience. So there's going to be a lot of things that come up in the race. But between us and the Democratic Party, it's night and day on the disagreements that we have.
And I think we just have time for one more question.
Okay.
So looking back to the previous presidential elections, you saw how Obama utilized social media and like a younger generation to turn out to vote. So how can these candidates mobilize this next generation of voters? I'll take your opinion first.
I mean, social media is important. As young people, we all use social media, probably me less than others. But ultimately, it comes down to ideas. I think people our age have a different set of policy preferences and a different sort of ideological spread than older generations, than the baby boomers. And so I think it's going to be about your policy platform. To a certain extent, it's also going to be about style. I mean, I think that Rand Paul actually has a realistic chance of appealing to younger voters simply because on many issues he's willing to speak his mind in an eloquent fashion and align with those policy priorities. And so I think it's just going to be about seizing this interaction of aesthetic preferences and policy preferences less than any sort of YouTube video. Like, social media is just a fact. Jeb Bush is going to be putting out YouTube videos, just as Rand Paul is. Secretary Clinton, I mean, she's already a meme with her texting on the phone while she has her sunglasses on. But Governor OMalley is just going to be sending out YouTube videos as well. He's going to be a meme, I'm sure. And so it's just a question of which person locks into what young people believe. And that's going to be how you get them out to vote.
Your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think ideas are very important, especially for Rand Paul with his views on drug decriminalization and things like that. Those appeal to young voters. But I think what's important to note is that young voters vote Democratic more than they vote Republican, but they vote Democratic less than they used to. A lot of young people have grown up under the Obama years and seen, the problems that we've had with our economy, with leadership in the world. A lot of young voters recognize that the path that we've had for the last 8 years hasn't worked. And we have a lot of young Republicans, running for president. If Hillary Clinton is the nominee, she's going to be almost 70 by the time she becomes president. She's very old. It's just a fact. And she's been around for a while. And I think if Republicans can remind older voters and tell young voters about the scandals of the Clinton years and point out the scandals that have been happening, that have just been unearthed now, I think a lot of young voters are going to be they're not going to be very happy with what they hear about Secretary Clinton. And I think they're going to like a lot of what the young Republican, presidential candidates have to say. So we'll see.
Well, anything can happen in 2016.
Yeah, but Secretary Clinton is not going to be the next president of the United States.
We'll see. But thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Mike, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Liz.
And thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Phoenix Politics. I'm Liz Stark, and tune in next time for Maroon TV.